students would just be intrinsically motivated to learn. Unfortunately, many times extrinsic motivations are necessary. For instance, an employer, would love for their employees to come to work and do their job and not have to, for the love of the job. But we know the reality is that an extrinsic motivator like a paycheck is critical in the process of getting a person to initiate this their behavior that we would refer to as being motivated behavior. On page 341, shifting gears to emotions. We know that emotions are a very important part of our existence. Once again, emotions are not something that you can see directly. We see the effects of emotions. We don't see happiness directly. We see a person smile. We see a person laugh. And so we assume internally this person is happy. We see a person cry. We see a person with a downturned face. We assume this person is experiencing the emotion of sadness. So again, emotion is a concept that sort of categorizes those internal processes that we then see the visible signs of, and then we make inferences about the person's emotion. Now obviously, we're not always perfect in making those inferences. For instance, you can see a person crying, and you could infer that the person was sad, when in reality the person just won the lottery and so they're happy. So again, this is one of the problems with emotions. Now we won't have time to explore that in great depth, but one of the problems with emotions is we can't see it directly. We've got to make an inference about the emotion. The amygdala on page 343. We know that there is a particular area of the brain called the amygdala that is responsible for many of our emotions, especially the emotion of fear. And you can see the definition here, the part of the limbic system within the brain that produces the fear response. Now, it's not limited just to fear. It can be associated with anxiety, but we've identified a specific area of the brain that is associated with many of our most obvious and important emotions. Now this is critical because, and I could elaborate a lot on this and I'm not, but we're able to manipulate the amygdala and thus manipulate a person's responses in terms of fear and anxiety. And there's obviously some research potential here, but there's some applied potential too in this case. But for test purposes, simply know that this is a structure that is associated with a very important emotion, fear. The polygraph on page 345, I think probably all of you know that this is a more technical term for the lie detector. The lie detector really is not a lie detector. It is the lie detector, the polygraph is based on the premise that if a person tells a lie, they will get emotional. And this is why the lie detector is not admissible in court, because it's not foolproof. Some people can tell a lie and not get emotional. Some people can be perfectly innocent and not tell a lie, and yet they get emotional. So the polygraph is not a perfect instrument. I think I mentioned before when we were going over the nervous system that we're actually getting closer to true lie detectors in terms of sort of analyzing the brain waves, but we're not there yet. The facial feedback hypothesis, which is an interesting hypothesis about how emotions are generated, but we'll leave that out for test purposes. On page 353, the term emotional intelligence. As you can see, the ability to perceive, use, understand, and manage emotions. We put a lot of emphasis, and we just got through talking in the previous chapter about intelligence quotient, and we put a lot of emphasis on intelligence, brain intelligence. But there's increasing sort of awareness that a person's ability to understand and manage their emotions this ability is very important in their ability to successfully live their life. An example of this, many medical schools are beginning to realize that many of physicians can be extremely intelligent in terms of IQ, but if they don't have good EQ, if they can't interact on an emotional level with their patients, then they don't become as effective a physician. So there are a lot of psychologists who now are promoting the idea that we should encourage and promote this idea of emotional intelligence as well as the idea of IQ. Okay, let's transition now to the questions. And the first question, and again, for those of you who were assigned these questions, this is your lucky day, and so this was Alan's question. So Alan gets 100, and if Alan was here, I'm sure he would do a good job. But the question is distinguish between the types of motivation. And you can actually find these in definition form, but obviously this is not the matching. I want you to actually give the definition here in these short answer discussion questions. But you can see this on page 321. But as I said before, the most obvious type of motivation is based on biological needs. And I asked you to give situations that illustrate this. So it's about 9:30 now on a Wednesday morning. And so say 12 o'clock or so today, my body is going to develop a biological need that's going to tell me it's time to get something to eat. Once again, as I said before, and I'm not going to belabor the point, this is the most obvious form of motivation. One that we don't think as much about, but is just a tremendously powerful form of motivation is what's called stimulus motivation. Stimulus motivation is the type of motivation that is not based on biological needs, but rather the need for information. And you can see here the need for stimulation and information in the textbook. For instance, if you're motivated to watch a TV show, or you're motivated to read a book, or you're motivated to go to a movie, or you're motivated to play a video game, you know, you're not going to die if you don't do that. But the motivation is our brains need to be active. And so our brains need to process this information, this stimulation. And so stimulus motivation is motivation based on this need to keep our brains active, this need to keep information flowing into our brain. And again, I don't want you to use a circular definition, the need for stimulation. Stimulus motivation is need for stimulation. It's this need to keep our brains active, to keep information flowing through our brains. And it's a very, very powerful need. Learned motivation. This is part of one's society. This is part of one's experiences. All of you, you're not here. I'm talking in front of a bunch of empty desks, which is sort of strange in a way. You know, in school, you know, the reason that you're in school is that you're motivated to come to school because someone has said there's a carrot out there, and that carrot is a college degree. So your motivation is a form of learned motivation. You have learned that you should sort of initiate, sustain certain activities in order to achieve a particular goal. A student, or not necessarily a student, a person, a guy who has a girlfriend, and the girlfriend, you know, wants a sign of commitment, and she says, you know, lets him know that she wants him to buy her a ring. You know, this motivation to get him to buy her a ring is learned motivation. It is something that she has learned in society, that in order for a guy to show his commitment, then he gives his girl a ring. So this is a type of learned motivation. Okay, I hope everybody got that one again, with these short answer discussion questions. If I went a little bit too fast, then, just simply go back and replay this video. On page 335, something that is a very important concept for me, since I'm interested in sports, is the inverted U function as it relates to performance. And you can see this depicted on page 335. Now, the book gets a little bit more technical than where I want you to be for test purposes. They talk about how the inverted U sort of forms in terms of complex tasks and simple tasks. But we're simply going to look at it in terms of a general sort of situation. And let's sort of look at it this way. And we're going to think in terms of the level of arousal. So we're going to put arousal here, and we're going to, let's put arousal down here. We're going to put arousal down here, and we're going to put the level of performance here. So, hopefully you used a pencil so you can scratch through it. So we're going to plot the level of arousal here and the level of performance. And we could say arousal, motivation. We could sort of equate arousal with motivation. So we're looking at how arousal and motivation is going to affect performance. Now, this is the basis of sports psychology. I haven't taught this in a couple of years, but I enjoy teaching sports psychology because I'm interested in sports. And this is the basis. Some of you may become coaches. Many of you are athletes. And so this really is a conceptual way of thinking about how motivation affects your performance. And there's been so much research to support this. For test purposes, what I would like for you to know very simply is that what the research has shown is that when we have a low level of arousal, so we're looking at over here, a low level of arousal. Arousal is increasing this way, performance is increasing this way. So when we have a low level of arousal here, obviously we have a low level of performance. Now again, this is correlational, this is not cause and effect. But a low level of arousal, if there's a low level of arousal, what we're going to find is that there is generally a low level of performance. Team or individual's not going to perform very well. What we find is that as the level of arousal increases, that you can see that performance is increasing. Performance is going up as the arousal is going up. And you can see this in your textbook on page 335, up until this optimal, I think they say optimum, no, they do say optimal, this optimal level of arousal, or this optimal level of motivation. I would probably, on for the test, I would probably accept, if you could remember optimal, best, most ideal, but I really would prefer that you use the term that psychologists use,